Welcome to the Lawrence County Oral History Project. It's good to have you back again, and I believe you're going to enjoy today's program. It's one that I've been looking forward to doing for some time, and the timing couldn't have been better. Back when I thought about doing a program that on the topic in which we were discussing months ago, I didn't know at that particular time that in this year of 2008 that Indiana would be playing such an important role in the politics of the election of a president, but for the first time in many years, actually now Indiana is involved in the process. In a few weeks, the nation will be looking at the 1st of May at the Indiana primary. It will be something that will be very important because we have a very tight race in for the Democratic nominee between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And so they need Indiana delegates. So this year in 2008, it's have an added importance to the presidential race. In fact, for the first time in a long time, it seems like the ones that are running are actually coming through Lawrence County and spending some time. As of this day, we are on April 1st of 2008. Tomorrow, April 2nd, in fact, former President Bill Clinton will be in Lawrence County and have a brief stop here. And it's been a long time since a former president or president has been in this county. In fact, we have to go back into the days of Franklin Roosevelt. That was the last time that a president has actually been in Lawrence County and made a brief stop. So this is a neat time to be around if you're involved with the political process. Let me give you some background on what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go back 40 years to 1968. And this program is about when Robert Kennedy, RFK, came into the county. The guests I'll be introducing to you in just a few moments played a role in Robert Kennedy coming into the county. I actually experienced it. I was in high school at Oleitic High School during that time. And remember very well the day whenever they told us to go outside, and we went out into the playground near where the basketball goal was located back then, and near the steps where the students would come in to go into the elementary, into the high school building. And there came up in a convertible was Robert Kennedy. And I was shocked, a lot of people were shocked to actually see a name of that famous recognition to stop at Oleitic High School. But indeed, for all those of you that didn't know this, he did stop at Oleitic High School. These men will verify my story that I'm going to introduce to you, but he did stop at Oleitic High School and spoke very briefly to the students there as he was heading on to Bedford, where he spoke on the square in just a very short period of time after that. But let me give you a little bit of background before I introduce you to my guest today. In '68, the civil rights movement was going strong. And in fact, in April of this month, 40 years ago, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Riots were going on in '68 in our major towns. Not only because of the civil rights issue, Vietnam was a very strong issue, a very emotional issue going on in '68. And there were also a lot of protests that was going on our college campuses in 1968 concerning the Vietnam War. In January of '68, it was a surprise, but we had the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. It was a surprise because it seemed like that things were going our way, and then all of a sudden there was a setback as there was a counterinsurgence. And so this was a shock. And later on in March, Robert Kennedy, which had made a decision, evidently, that to run against Johnson, and I understand, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit, but that I understand that him and LBJ didn't get along very well. There were some problems back in the time whenever his brother, John F. Kennedy, was president, and Johnson was vice president. But in about March 16th, Robert Kennedy announced that he would run for president of the United States in a Democratic ticket. This was a surprise to a lot of people. It was late getting into the game. Usually there would have been an announcement much earlier than this, so he was late getting in. And then on March 31st, I believe, LBJ again shocked everybody in the United States by a speech on nationwide television that he would not run, he would not accept the nomination for President of the United States. So LBJ, at the end of March, dropped out. So in the state of Indiana, we had now the newcomer, which was RFK, joining the primary, along with a very popular, at least for some people, governor of Roger Brannigan. And then you had Eugene McCarthy that was also running at the time. So this is kind of set the stage for what happened. With Robert Kennedy, it was kind of the time in which he was going to test the waters. Indiana was the first test to see how it was going to go with his candidacy. To give you a little bit of background again, John F. Kennedy was soundly defeated in Indiana back when he was running for president. Richard Nixon beat him pretty bad, actually. And George Wallace did well, even then. And George Wallace was again involved in the '68 campaign. So with this background, with all that was going on in 1968, we're going to take you back to those years. 40 years ago, it's hard to believe. And we're going to talk a little bit about when Robert Kennedy came to Lawrence County. Nearest to me, to my left, is a man that I've actually known for several years. I always, when I think of Bob Masterson, I think of him as Coach Masterson. And he will always be, in my mind, will be Coach Masterson. Now, we've always said a few things on this program that sparks controversy, and by your emails and by your phone calls you give me, so every once in a while I know that happens. But I happen to think that he was the coach of the greatest team that was in Lawrence County. And there I said it, and I know that will spark controversy. But if not the greatest, one of the greatest, the 1968 Olytic Bearcats. To watch that team was something to behold. What a team that was, Bob. And it's both 67 and 68, both great years, but that 68 team was fantastic.
Yes, it was.
And, you know, we could go on. I'd love to do a program on that, but I had Dan Bush on not too long ago, and we talked a little bit about that. But what a great team that was. And you just won another sectional in 1968 when all this was occurring.
Yeah, we had won in '67, and then had a big war, I think, with Bedford in the newspaper. At least they had had a good year, and we decided. I can remember that we sent a picture of the Olytic team to all of our players and made a unsavory comment on there, and they thought it came from Bedford, so I think it hopped them up a little bit, and we won the sectional very easily that year.
Yeah, and I remember then in the semifinals you beat Bedford pretty handily, about 20-some points,
Yeah.
24 points, something like that. And then in the final game, had Fayetteville. Fayetteville reached the final game with you, and you guys beat them by 20-some points. So that was a real memorable year in 1968. I'm going to ask you why I have you, Bob, because Dan Bush said something on our program we had a few weeks ago about that, at least in the '67 sectional, I don't know if this said in '68, but when you guys stayed at the Greystone Hotel, that you had them walk around the square. Do you remember doing that?
Yeah, we always fed them, and then we usually took them out and walked them around and tried to get their legs loosened up, get their mind off what was going on, and it's just something we always did, and we didn't want them laying in bed all day.
Okay.
So we got them up and got them ready.
Okay. Bob was a coach during Olytic in the '60s, and you also you taught PE. What else did you teach at Olytic?
I also taught U.S. history, health and safety, served as athletic director, coached baseball, basketball, a little more than I wanted to, but that's the way you did in a small school.
Did you like teaching in a small school back then, Bob?
I think the thing about a small school was you had a little more contact with the kids. You know, when I came to BNL, there were so many kids here. You didn't get to know a lot of them. And my job here at BNL was dealing with the kids who really didn't want to be here. Sometimes that wasn't too pleasant. Mm-hmm. But I liked the smaller school.
Yeah. Were you the first coach for BNL?
Yes, I taught the last 2 years of the old Bedford High School and the first 2 years out here as the coach.
Okay.
And then got smart enough and got out of coaching.
Okay. Okay. Well, believe me that you had a great run at Oleitic in the 60s.
I
You'll always
enjoyed it.
be remembered. I would say that people still probably talk to you about those years, don't they?
We still remember the old Bearcat days.
Yeah, they sure do. Good to have you, Bob.
Thank you.
Another guest that we have is certainly one that has always speaks his mind. As long as I've known Al Walker, I've always liked having him on the program because I can always get him to talk. And he's not afraid to tell what he would like to. Al was on a program about the Bedford sectional a few weeks ago, and that was in the capacity because he was with WBIW for all those years and a radio announcer, so we were wanting to get that perspective. But we're getting a little bit different story from Al today. Al, tell us what you were in 1968, how you were involved in the Democratic Party at that time.
Yes, I was chairman of the Lawrence County Democrat Central Committee. By 1968, I forget when I first went in, but I'd been there several years. It was an ambition of mine. I wanted, in my youth, and certainly by college, I wanted to be an active politician. I did not want to run for public office. I wanted to run political campaigns. Well, I came to Lawrence County, and I'm not from here.
What brought you to Lawrence County, Al?
I was working as a salesman for Procter & Gamble at the time. Later on, I went to work for WBIW, and I was there for 20 years. But I'm a native of Evansville, but when I came here and then decided I was a Democrat, they sucked me up like a blotter because there aren't many Democrats in Lawrence County.
I don't know if there's still very many Democrats in Lawrence County.
Well, not enough. And I raised two of them. They both left town.
Okay. So they talked to you about becoming involved with the party. Who was the Democratic chairman before you? Do you remember?
Wayne Kern.
Wayne Kern. Okay.
Yes.
And
I never would have had an opportunity if Wayne Kern hadn't have given me the opportunity
Okay.
to be active. And then when Wayne went to the post office, I said, I'd like to have your job. I had another person who pushed me real hard to go for that job, and a man whose name probably would come up here later on anyway. That was Wayne Robbins. Mm-hmm. Wayne Robbins was one of my best personal friends. He was very active in Democrat politics, but he also had a drugstore down the South Side. Mm-hmm. Two sons, one of which is the circuit court judge, and Patrick is a teacher, I think, isn't he?
Patrick.
Oh no, he's run the family business.
He's right, and he's city councilman.
Yeah, city councilman. That's not who he was.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I got into it. I had politics in my blood of sorts, and when I came here, there weren't many people that wanted to be a Democrat. So, shoot, it was wide open for me.
Okay.
And incidentally, one final thing, I was a convert to the cause. My mother never forgave me for being a Democrat.
Oh, because so she didn't like FDR?
No. Well, nor did my father, but by this time we're talking about, my father died when I was 12, but my mother never, she never got over well, as a matter of fact, I told her one time, I'm getting off subject, but I said, Mother, you were a total failure as a parent. Two most important decisions we make in our life are our politics and our religion. Mm-hmm. And I said, I left home and I changed both. I was raised to be a Republican and a Baptist. I'm a Democrat and a Presbyterian. My mother, who did nothing in politics, nothing, no yard signs, no bumper stickers, no nothing, but always voted. She'd always try and find one Democrat to vote for, just so she said she split her ticket. But all the rest of us Republican. But she worked very active in the First Baptist Church of Evansville and the choir and the youth choir, and with all that background, she said, I feel a lot worse about your political change than I do your religious change. Well, I said, Mother, I can't believe you said that. And then she said, I'm really getting off the subject, but I couldn't help it. My mother was a well-educated woman for a day. She had some college, and we're talking about a woman born in 1900. And she said, if I ever moved to a town that didn't have a Baptist church, I could be a Presbyterian. And I said, Mother, where would that town be that doesn't have a Baptist church? We got way off the subject.
Well, and I know where you usually sometimes you do that, Al, so I'll try to always bring you back a little bit. But
Okay.
It's always interesting to see how someone becomes a Republican or a Democrat, I guess. And a lot of it has to do with the way you were raised.
And I didn't. I went the other way.
Right. My mother was a Republican, will be a Republican until the day she dies, but my dad was a Democrat, and like a story I shared with you before we started today, one time when I asked my dad why he became a Democrat, he said, because your mom was a Republican. And so that, I guess that's as good an answer as any. I think he always wanted mom to vote first so he could always cancel mom's vote. But so I came from a very split party affiliation in my family as well.
Well, I worked my way through college all the time in a factory and got very active in the United Auto Workers Union, and that's what the UAW made a Democrat out of
Right.
me.
Bob, how were you involved in 1968 in the Democratic Party?
Well, I think I kind of got hoodwinked into this. Wayne Robbins is a good friend of mine, and as Al said, he was into the Democrat politics. And we just had a couple of successful years in basketball, and of course, my name was a little better known throughout the county than it was previously. So I think Wayne picked on me to say, won't you be his campaign chairman for Lawrence County? And I finally agreed, and that's about the way it happened, and I've never forgiven Wayne since. God bless his soul. But no, I enjoyed it, and we had a lot of fun. I can remember the night before the election going out and putting up campaign signs around the various precincts in the county, and rode along. I think Paul Baker, who had Baker's Furniture, was one of the guys that was instrumental in encouraging me to do that. And I know that a lot of things we did, we got high school kids to get on the telephone and make calls and things of those types. And I really enjoyed it after I got into it.
But, you know, as popular as you were with winning 2 sectionals in Oolitic, you could have run for town mayor, and you probably would have, you could have been the mayor of Oolitic. Do you know that?
I did run for the town board one time and got elected, and I said, you know, I keep making these mistakes all the time. And we finally, I left that job because we moved to Indianapolis to take another job, so I got rid of that one too.
Yeah. Okay, you know, guys, back in 1968, and I gave a little bit of introduction, we threw out the names there of Roger Brannigan and Eugene McCarthy, and some of these names that kind of start to stir the memory a bit. But give us an idea of how this came about, and how did you guys find out, and whoever wants to start this session, that Robert Kennedy was even interested. It's hard to believe in today's day and age that 40 years ago that he came down through Oolitic, but again, the main road that time came through Oolitic.
Right.
What we have to remember is Highway 37, that came through the towns of Needmore and Oolitic. But who found out, how did this come about, how did you first find out that Robert Kennedy was interested in coming to Lawrence County?
Well, Al could probably answer that better than I can.
No, I can't.
No,
As
you
a matter
can't.
of fact, I was very upset about it.
Yeah. Now you want a supporter of Robert Kennedy.
No, I was not.
You've already made that plain to us.
But more than that, it was causing a lot of dissension within the Democrat Party because this group was this way and this way and this way, and I was trying to be the healer of wounds, not the causer. And there were a lot of very unhappy people because they were taking sides. They were unhappy with me because I didn't take the side they wanted, and
get into that a little bit, Al. Why, because you're right, there was a lot of division. First of all, Johnson was an incumbent president.
yes.
By the time when Robert Kennedy announced it, LBJ had not said he wasn't running again.
That's correct.
He was still running. But he didn't do well. I know in one of the primaries, I think the New Hampshire primary or something before that time. In fact, I think Eugene McCarthy kind of surprised a lot of people, and I think that they were looking at Minnesota coming up primary, and he wasn't going to maybe do well there either. But so this was really kind of split into part. When Robert Kennedy got into the primary in '68, there were a lot of ill feelings about him coming
That's
in,
correct.
right?
That's correct.
Because they felt like he shouldn't, because Brannigan running, McCarthy.
Brannigan was running as a favorite son, but he was really running as a stand-in for Hubert Humphrey. but he denied that emphatically, but that's still what the situation was. And primarily because the Democrat state chairman at the time was very strong Hubert Humphrey support, a man named Gordon St. Angelo.
And Humphrey had already thrown his hat in the ring.
Yes,
by this
he
time,
had.
By March, April of '68?
Oh, I'd say yes. I would say yes.
Okay. Certainly, Sue, is when he realized, I guess, that LBJ was going to run again.
Yes.
Why do you think LBJ decided not to run again?
Well, I think he was concerned he was going to get beat, among other things. The war had really, was there were riots on the streets. There was a lot of comparison. I've made the comparison, but then with Vietnam versus today, with what we have in Iraq. But there's one great big difference why people aren't, this is my opinion, but
The draft.
I'm sure I'm right. The draft, absolutely.
The draft, right. I believe that too. So
We were drafting young people to go to Vietnam.
I just throwing my 2 cents out there, but I really believe the Tet Offensive had a great deal with, also something to do, certainly with the LBJ. This was a surprise. This was basically everybody thought we were doing so well, and then all of a sudden for them to be able to have a counterinsurgence like they did was a shock.
That's
to people.
correct. That's correct.
So LBJ had pulled out, but I think you're right. I think he was perhaps thinking he was going to lose. It's hard to beat an incumbent.
Yeah, but I think he was bitter about it. I think he was really saying, all right, you don't like me? Take it.
So whenever he dropped out, then Hubert Humphrey became more involved with it, and you were a Humphrey's backer.
That's correct.
So neither one of you...
I really, let me go, I never did care for Gene McCarthy. His philosophy was substantially to the left of mine. And then I just felt I didn't like Kennedy because I thought he was an opportunist. So that left me with Humphrey.
Was Humphrey anti-Vietnam?
No, but he, yeah.
Okay, was Eugene McCarthy carrying an
Very
anti-Vietnam message
right.
at that time? And by the way, Bob, Gene McCarthy spoke in Lawrence County too.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't remember that.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
I was there.
on the square. I remember that too. I remember being dismissed and being able to go and hear that as well.
As the Democrat chairman at the time, I'm having fits. What are you people doing? You've got, we Democrats are in a minority group and you've got a split. Why are you even coming? I asked that. There's probably not going to be in the primary 3,000 Democrat votes in the whole primary. This is a Republican county. And the only hope we've got is to keep unity, and goodness knows we don't have it now.
And you're bringing up a good question. Why would, during 1968, why would Robert Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy, and Roger Brannigan all speak in Lawrence County in a primarily Republican county?
Well, because they had some supporters that had some influence. Wayne Robbins, Fran Morrow for McCarthy, and then Al Walker more than anybody else. And the old guard Democrats.
Well, who was for Robert Kennedy at that time in the county?
Oh,
I was.
Okay. Okay, we have a vote here.
And so was Wayne Robbins.
Yeah, Wayne.
Okay, Wayne was a big Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but neither of you know really how that, or who he made the contact. Would he have made contact with Wayne Robbins about trying to set up a visit here in Lawrence County?
Probably. Or Wayne would have made contact with them.
Yeah, I think that's the way it happened. It's like you said, it's 40 years ago, and I don't remember all the
Were
details.
you old enough to vote then?
Barely.
So we don't know who really had the contact, but obviously, then where was he coming from? Where was Robert Kennedy coming from? Did he speak in Bloomington? Did he speak at that time? Do you remember?
Well, I think he'd been in Indianapolis. Though whether he stopped in Bloomington or not, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But
I would think he would.
And we don't know really where he was headed back in 68.
No.
But obviously he was doing the southern part of it. Bob, then how did you get involved with Robert Kennedy in this situation? Because I know that you two, and I didn't know this till just a few minutes ago, but you guys actually rode in the car in a convertible. I remember when Robert Kennedy pulled up and with the student body there at Oleitic, and he was in this convertible. He actually got out for a few minutes. You may have to help me with this, some of my memories of this. But it seemed like that he maybe got out of the convertible for a few minutes, stood there at where the steps go down to the high school, and he stood there, made a few remarks. I think that Danny Bush, maybe Larry Lamb, gave him a basketball. It kind of helped me to jog my memory, Bob, on what happened during that time.
We had a basketball autographed by all the guys on the basketball team, and he got out and was giving a small talk, and he asked Danny to make a basket for him, and he said, "Now be sure you don't miss." And of course, Danny shot the basket and then gave him the basketball. And then we got back in the convertible, and I think it was Al and Wayne and I in the back seat, and Kennedy and the driver in the front. And I can remember Kennedy asking how he was doing here, and of course Al said, "Not very good." And I countered and said, "I think you're doing all right here." And so we rode on over to Bedford.
This was a discussion between Olynyk and Bedford.
I don't remember that part, and I'm serious. I do remember this. I'm serious. He talked to Wayne and Bob about what are we going to be doing, what's going on here, and how are we doing. And then he looked at me, and because I hadn't said anything, and he said, "Now, what's the opposition doing to me?" He knew somebody had said the county chairman is not your friend. And I don't remember my answer, but he put me in my place.
Did he seem like a very personable person?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, he did.
In that, just that few moments,
Yeah.
you guys would nobody at that time, we're talking about, Bob, do you remember what the day was when he actually stopped at Olynyk and Bedford?
No, I don't.
Was it in April? It was in April.
It was in
wasn't
April,
It
yeah.
was in April, but we don't know whether that was mid-April or at the end. We'll have to look at the papers to find out.
Yeah, I had an old newspaper at home, and I tried to dig it out, and I was running a little late, and I didn't find it. It still shows the picture of it taken on the square. But I was going to bring that along, and my wife probably hid it from me, so.
So how would, who would have convinced whoever was driving Robert Kennedy to make that stop in Olynyk? I mean, there would have had to have been some kind of, someone would have had to let the school know that he was coming through. I mean,
Yeah, actually, there was a tour bus that a lot of the reporters and his other campaign people were in a bus that stopped in Olynyk. And you may not remember that, but it stopped just
remember
back
that,
from the convertible. And some of those people got off. I'm trying to think of the guy who was his campaign manager, had the Polish name.
No, I can't. Don't remember.
Yeah, but anyway, those people were on the bus, and they followed along behind after. I can't even remember whether we had a police escort from Olynyk into Bedford.
what about Secret Service?
I suppose they were there.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing anybody that
Nobody pulled a gun on us.
that raised any suspicions on my part. But
I mean, it's amazing. He appears in open-aired convertible. I don't remember secret. I mean, but surely he had Secret Service. But I don't remember any of that. I don't remember police there. I mean, it seemed like that it was just he came in and there wasn't that much protection. Perhaps there was, but
Well,
I mean today now they let the Secret Service meets way beforehand with the local law enforcement to set up things. But I don't think that happened then.
don't
Did it?
forget what happened to Robert Kennedy in California.
Right, and you guys had
got
no
shot.
idea, of course, and just by June that he would be dead.
yeah, I remember, as I told you earlier, I stayed up late that night to watch the returns from California, and then it came on that he had been shot. And I think about 4 o'clock in the morning, I called Wayne Robbins and say, well, they've taken care of it. They've shot him out in California.
Yeah, that was a shock to everybody. And we go back to April 4th. That's a date that's going to stick in people's memories. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Actually, Kennedy was in the state during this time. I think he was in Muncie when he found out that he had been assassinated. Went to Indianapolis. I guess if you go to a park in Indianapolis today, I actually haven't been there, but I've read about it, that there is a statue on the spot where Robert Kennedy made a speech where when Martin Luther King was assassinated. He was downtown Indianapolis, and there he made a speech in a park about this. In fact, he announced to the crowd in Indianapolis on April 4th of 1968 that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. It is believed, and I'm going to read a portion of that speech in a little bit, but it is believed that probably his speech and his mannerisms was responsible for the riots not breaking out in Indianapolis back in April of '68.
That's good. That's good.
And so there is I'm going to go and find that one of these days, but there is a memorial there for Robert Kennedy and on the spot where he made that speech. So I know he wasn't in Lawrence County at that particular time. But somebody evidently had mentioned that he was going to come through because they brought the student body out in Oolitic. Yep. And we lined there and we waited, and he was good enough to stop there just for a few moments. And of course, now Danny took the shot. I've mentioned that. Of course, and Danny, I don't think Danny ever thought he missed a shot, at any point in time.
No, he never quit shooting. No,
And so I think what I hear is that they asked Robert Kennedy maybe to take a shot, and he didn't, but he asked Danny to do it for him, and Danny went out there. And of course, Danny was about as big as a legend as Robert Kennedy to Oolitic about that time. And then he went on to Bedford. Where is that where you got into the convertible then, guys, at that point in Oolitic, to go to Bedford? That's where you met them at then?
We got in Oolitic, then we rode over and went around on the square on the, would have been what, the south side.
South side.
Pulled up through there and got out, and then they had the trailer set up there on the east side, and they got up on the trailer, and I know I introduced him at that time, and we had a few protesters with signs out there and things like that, but I think he finally put them in their place.
Oh, yes.
And
there were some very unkind
do you remember anything he said during that speech?
Only thing I remember was about the sign, when one of them had said something about Cuba. It was a slam at his New England accent. They had written Cuba, C-U-B-A-R, and it was one of the signs he pointed at and said, well, there's someone that doesn't even know how to spell Cuba.
Oh, okay. He said that on the square.
Yes, and slowly but surely all the signs melted into the street.
What did the signs, you remember that sign, do you remember what else the signs
Get out of Indiana or something. It was all very unkind.
It was all negative signs. All
Yes.
these were, and these protesters, were these local people, or were these people
They
that
were
came
students at Bedford High School who was put up to it by a history teacher in the school.
Okay.
but he took pretty good care of those, and before long, I think the crowd got with him, and the signs disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay. So the signs were there, and a small protest, but it wasn't a large group that was actually protesting at that time.
No, they were put up to it by the people who did it, I'm sure, meant it. They were, I'd say, very partisan Republicans, but it was a group of high school students.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was high school students, so it was local high school students that was involved with that
Yes.
protest part of it at that time. Okay. When he came into on the square, was basically the crowd, though, pretty friendly to him, other than the protesters?
I thought so.
I mean, were people pretty congenial about him?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah,
think they were kind of honored.
Yeah.
This is he was the brother of a slain president. I mean, we've talked about this on about memorable moments. I've interviewed a lot of World War II veterans. We talk about December 7, 1941. That's a day that you always will remember. If you were living then, you would always remember December 7, 1941. Mm-hmm. Well, the day Kennedy was shot, John F. Kennedy was shot, that's a day that will always stick in my memory. What I was doing, what was happening during the time. And then you have another Kennedy. I mean, back in the 1960s, the Kennedy name meant power, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Well, and hero worship in the eyes of an awful lot of people. The people, now there were a lot of people who hated the Kennedys, but there was also a whole lot of people that they idolized him. Mm-hmm. I think it was Jack that got that started. He was young and had a winning personality, and it was.
And so do you think Robert Kennedy was running on his brother's name a little bit?
Oh, yeah, why not?
Yeah, it only makes sense. You'd take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this would have been a great appeal to people.
Yeah.
But what would appeal to him, again, if he was coming into a county or coming into a state that had that his brother had lost convincingly. He was coming into a state in which Roger Brannigan was definitely the favorite son. Probably they at one time thought probably he would carry it. Eugene McCarthy had already been starting to steamroll. Coming into a situation like this, you think, why would he choose Indiana? Because it seemed like it'd be a state that you would get beat in.
Well, but remember, it's a primary. So who's voting? Only Democrats. He wasn't running against a Republican. He was running against other Democrats. Now, in the fall, that might have been a different story.
So in '68, were the Democrats looking for another? I mean, Robert Kennedy jumped in for some reason. I mean, so evidently there was. Did the Democrats not like Humphrey? Did they not like Eugene McCarthy? What
Well,
was
some of them did, some of them didn't.
Did they
I
feel
don't
like he
remember
could
now.
beat-
I think Kennedy carried Indiana in the primary, which fooled me. I thought he was a fine man, but I thought we had one issue in Indiana that apparently wasn't there, and it's an issue that was big in the 30s. What was the big, strong thing coming out of the 30s in Indiana on the Republican side, but still there?
You have me.
The Ku Klux Klan. And D.C. Stevenson said, I own Indiana. And he was the
In the
head Klux or
1920s.
whatever.
Yeah.
But they were a hate group. And what were they based on? Not black in Indiana. Didn't have enough blacks to hate. Catholic. And who were the Kennedys but Catholic?
D.C. Stevenson was very powerful in the 1920s in Indiana
30s.
politics and in the 1930s, and he was either from Greenwood or Greenfield, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I can't
Somewhere
tell you
around there.
which. Yeah.
And it was one of the Greens that he was located with. But when he fell from grace pretty much, which of course the Klan lost a lot of their
Oh, yes,
political
yes,
when he fell.
Yeah, and why did he fall? It was a sexual thing.
Yes, yeah, he was involved with that. But again, bringing up the Catholic, this would have been an issue back in the '68
Oh,
election, right?
yes.
But now his brother was Catholic and he won in 1960.
Didn't win Indiana, did he?
No, he didn't win Indiana.
Why?
Well, because we've always been a Republican state.
LBJ carried it.
Okay, yeah.
One of the few times a Democrat ever carried it, though.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
part's true.
It's,
We've been primarily
But-
Republican, so I mean, I guess what I'm
And
getting
don't
at-
get me wrong, I'm a Presbyterian Protestant, but I do believe that the Kennedys did help get rid of some religious prejudice.
Okay,
I think it was good for our country
yeah.
because the Pope didn't come over and run the country.
Well, I from the speeches that I have been reading about that Robert Kennedy made when he was in Indiana in '68, it was really his platform, and maybe you guys can either jump in or disagree or agree with me, but it was really anti-Vietnam. I mean, that was the platform that he was carrying, that was carrying a lot of popularity with the people.
That's correct.
And now on the Republican side, Richard Nixon was running.
Stay the course.
And was there anybody else that you can think of that was running against Nixon at that
I don't
time on the
think so.
Republican?
I don't believe there was.
Okay. Do you remember if any Republican candidate, when we had the primary and the Republican, was there any Republican candidates that came through here at all? Or, I know Nixon didn't, so I don't remember of
Yeah,
any.
I
But
don't.
ended up, okay, that the Democrats did. So Kennedy was in for just a short period of time. When he was up on the square, and he spoke for how long, would you say?
Oh, 15 minutes maybe.
Yeah, 15 or 20 minutes, I would say.
And did he speak, again, just trying to get your memories flowing here, but did he speak about the war? Did he speak about the economy? Do you remember anything at all that he was spoken? I know you mentioned about the sign, but anything else that you can remember in his speech that day?
No.
40 years ago, my mind I'm lucky I even remember being there, but I don't remember what he said in the speech.
And people are going to condemn me for this position, but I'm very partisan. And I don't care what he said. If he won the nomination on the Democrat ticket, I'd vote for him.
Okay. And we will share with the people that Robert Kennedy did win the Indiana primary in May.
Fooled me, really fooled me.
Yeah, he did. I can remember listening to the returns late that night. In fact, I think I told you earlier that Ted Kennedy called me on the telephone that night and thanked me for what help I gave him, which was probably very little, but at least they were nice enough to make a phone call.
Okay, so Ted Kennedy called you. That
Yes, he
was
did.
nice. Well, you had the Kennedy name, you had the Masterson name. And,
Right.
Yeah, right.
In Lawrence County, I mean, boy,
What more could you
that's
ask for?
it's a winning combination right there.
Let me give you a story that I think people will find interesting. We had them all. Kennedy came, and so did Gene McCarthy. So did Roger Brannigan. Now, and Roger Brannigan came, it was on about a Saturday night before the primary. And I was chairman and of course wanted to put on a good show for the governor. And we had it out at Wilson Park. And we put up a bunch of chairs outside because but I told my friends who were there with me helping set it up, I said, the governor is going to play to a full house. If we don't have one out there, we're moving them in. But because I'm sure we'll have a full house inside. Well, it was time, and I said, bring them in. We didn't have a big crowd. And it was cold as well, so.
And when would that have been?
Well, right about
What
Saturday
month?
before the primary in May.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
as we're getting all those chairs and getting things set up and trying to get reorganized, somebody came over to me and said, where do you want to put Walter Cronkite and the guys from CBS News? And I thought, that's all I need, some smart aleck. I said, put them over Huntley Brinkley. And he just looked at me kind of funny. And about that time, the door opened, those old-fashioned big color cameras, and in came the president of CBS News and Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite was here in
Covered
Bedford,
that
Indiana.
meeting. And afterwards, a group of us had a little cocktail reception at a guy's home, and I got him off to the side and said, why Bedford? And he said, you had the only rally going on in Indiana that night.
Okay.
It was us or nobody.
What-
He incidentally was a very fine gentleman. And in those days, I was working for WBIW, and the home where we went to, they had dinner guests that night, and it happened to be Bill Quigg, who was my boss, and his wife.
This is the home you went to?
Yeah, not Quigg's home, but
Okay. Was E.B. Crow, you mentioned his name in this, didn't you,
Yeah.
somehow? Okay.
well, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, just for a
Typical
minute,
Mr.
please.
Crow.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll mention the family where we went, but he just came over and he said, Mr. Walker, we're all going over to so-and-so's house afterwards and have some drinks, and the governor's coming. And I think that Mr. Cronkite is going to come. And I remember I said, could I bring my wife? Well, I guess. Okay, I'd like to. All right. And we went. The people's home where we went to had no idea what was going on, and E.B., typical E.B., walked in and he said, I've got the governor of Indiana and Walter Cronkite and a bunch of people coming in for drinks.
Okay. And so Brannigan was there as well?
Yes, and
Okay.
Cronkite and the president of CBS News.
What, when you talk about Brannigan, Eugene McCarthy, and Kennedy coming to speak, what would have been who drew the biggest crowd in Lawrence County? I'm talking about when they appeared in Bedford.
Yeah, Kennedy.
Kennedy.
By far?
Yeah, by
Yes. Probably Brannigan second, only because of the patronage system. We said, the governor's got to have a crowd, be there.
Okay. So Kennedy's was the most enthusiastic.
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, yeah. You know, the street there, what is that, I or J? That the whole street there was, just packed full of people, and in behind us, the trailer where he spoke, there was
It's I Street, yeah.
there was a lot of people there.
Yeah. And so did he spend time shaking hands, talking with people
Well,
as much as he
with a
could?
few as he walked through it was pretty crowded as he came through. In fact, I think some of the high school cheerleaders from somewhere kind of formed an escort, and we came up through
That sounds logical.
the east side of the square there, and I'm sure that he shook hands with people along there, and we got to the trailer pretty quick, and he gave his speech, and like the wind, he disappeared.
Well, that short time that you had a chance to meet him, I mean, you would have no idea that within 6 weeks or something like that, it wouldn't have been very long, that he would be gone. But what was your impression of him? Was it pretty much what you had preconceived that he was like?
Yes, it was. I think he didn't appear to be, one of these people who thought he was better than somebody else. I thought him to be a very common person. I didn't sense any.
Considering his background especially,
Yeah,
he came through very
I
well.
just thought he, was just a common person, and that's the way he talked. And I do remember this about him. I could tell he had laid in the sun a lot somewhere along there because he was tan as he could be,
Oh, is that right?
and almost leathery faced from I think being out in the sun, probably driving up or riding up and down the boat there at their compound there in
Martha Vineyard or
Hyannisport or
whatever.
whatever it was.
Hyannisport,
Yeah.
yeah.
But he had the weathered look, I would say that.
How old would Robert Kennedy have been at this time? Do you remember? Would he have been in his 40s?
He was
Yes.
still in his 40s.
Yeah.
Not exactly sure, but
Oh, I'd bet on that, though.
Bob, what made him appealing to young people, do you think?
well, I think one of the things was the war. I think a lot of the young people were opposed to the draft and the war, and I think his message was that it was time for us to get out of there, and
And he was young.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think that that's why a lot of them felt that way. And I think he had the support of most of the young people at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, he seemed to bring a message of hope, didn't he, when he spoke?
Yes.
The audio that I've heard of him, he was a good speaker.
He
And
was,
all the Kennedys were good speakers. And he had a certain appeal, that certain hope for the community. Were protesters at when Brannigan spoke here or McCarthy? Was it
No,
only
I
in
don't think
Kennedy
so.
where the protesters were at?
No, it was strictly, I'm not going to name him, but one person put him up to it.
Okay.
And he apparently didn't object to McCarthy or didn't think they were a factor.
When you mentioned, Channel 6 back then, Channel 8, 13, back then, I can remember Walter Cronkite is certainly a name that comes in the news area, but Huntley and Brinkley, certainly, maybe at the top at that time. But, so there were TV cameras there. This made statewide coverage, obviously, when the county, were there TV stations there actually that was
I don't know
recording this
about
event?
that. They came to our rally, but
I can imagine if
CBS
Robert Cronkite was there that they wouldn't have had some kind of film, but again, I don't
yeah,
know.
they and I don't know what.
I don't recall seeing any TV stations there, or if they were in the background. I didn't see them.
Yeah.
Like I said, the only reason they were there at the thing with Brannigan was they said it was the only rally going on that night in Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's us or nobody.
So did you guys, either of you had a chance to meet Eugene McCarthy or Brannigan? You had, I know Brannigan. What about McCarthy?
No.
Did any of you?
I did.
You met McCarthy? What was your impression of Eugene McCarthy at that time?
I didn't like him to begin with, so I didn't give him a fair chance, I'd say. Because I met him in a particular person's home where there was a group of us there, and he was personable enough, but his political philosophy was not real close to mine.
Yeah. But Humphrey pretty much
Yeah.
hit the bill.
So was Kennedy, for that matter. I didn't,
What I can remember from Humphrey is that he seemed to always have an upbeat personality. He always was optimistic. He seemed to be a happy person.
Yeah.
That's what always just sticks in my mind about Hubert Humphrey.
He spoke to us at a meeting down at French Lick. And I was a speech minor in college. And so I kind of watched speakers and and he was giving a speech. It was at a group of Democrat chairman and vice chairman and their spouses at French Lick. And of course, so he's talking to, he's preaching to the choir. But it was a rabble rouser thing, and it was going over like mad. And I mean, just as thrilled as could be, and he must have got 20 standing ovations during the thing, you know. Well, the next day, we were still at the same place having breakfast with all the chairman, the vice chairman, and wives. And my wife was saying, were you, she said, wasn't he impressed? Yeah, my wife was very impressed with what he did. And the guy who was sitting beside her said, you weren't the lady that stood up on the table and threw your napkin in the ceiling, was she was.
Oh, she was, okay.
I didn't see her do it. She was embarrassed.
Let me ask you both this question. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but if Robert Kennedy would have lived, and this is obviously hypothetical because we know in June in '68 that he was assassinated. When I look back upon the year of 1968, that was a traumatic year when we were living through it. I mean, when you think of Martin Luther King's assassination, the Tet Offensive, Robert Kennedy being assassinated, all that was happening in '68, that was an historic year.
He would have been elected.
Yeah, that's my question. Do you
I
think
am
that he would have
convinced he
been,
would have-
that he would have had the Democratic nomination? Would he have been elected
Yes,
president?
He would have. He would have.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, I think that he was the only really good candidate at the time. I think he would have won it very easily.
So you think that he would have beaten Nixon?
Yes.
I'm sure he would have beaten Nixon.
Okay, that sounds pretty definite that he would beat Nixon.
Oh, I think he was a winner. He had a winning personality. No, I think it would have.
I think that they would have ever had a square off on a debate when you put Nixon against Robert Kennedy. Certainly he would have had the television appeal, don't you think?
Yes.
During that time over Nixon, and that would have won points.
Yes.
So your overall impression of Robert Kennedy, though, from having the opportunity to meet him at that time, was as a person, was actually pretty favorable.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
And he was a personable, he was having probably the most famous name, the last name, in our history at that time. I mean, in the 1960s of a Kennedy name. But he still seemed like that he could talk to just a normal person, whether it was in a barbershop or on a square or wherever he was at. He seemed to be able to be on that level, to me.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think you're right.
Possibly. When you look back then on 1968, Bob, what do you, now it's been 40 years, what goes through your mind then, 1968, other than the basketball championship?
Well, I look back and I think how disappointed I was when after watching the primary in California and he got killed, and I just kind of had the feeling that, we've lost something that we'll never get back. So I look back and once in a while I even get out that old newspaper and read it a little bit, and I think, what would have happened? Maybe things would be a lot different today.
What might have been.
Yeah.
Did it hit you in the same way that it did whenever his brother, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated?
Very similar, yeah. I felt about the same way.
It would have been even kind of a little bit more personal maybe for you, for Robert Kennedy, because you had the opportunity to meet him.
Yeah, it was disappointing. I don't know the words really to describe how I felt, but I kind of had that feeling, that, we have lost something, then it's never going to be back.
When his brother was killed, I heard it on the radio as I was going to my mother's funeral. Toughest weekend I ever spent in my life. Sunday we went to her home church and they dedicated the whole service to her. Monday I came back and then watched the funeral on Tuesday, I think it was. I went out to Wayne Robbins to watch it, matter of fact.
Yeah, I was teaching a government class at Walden High School when it came on the PA that, he'd been shot. So that's a long time ago, too.
What was the reaction of the people that was around you whenever that happened?
Well, got very still. Nobody said much of anything. And I think they kind of kept the news on the PA system for a while. You could hear the announcers giving updates and things like that. And I remember we had a basketball game that same night, and there was discussions of whether to cancel it. They finally decided they'd go on and play. So we did have a basketball game on that night.
You went ahead and played, didn't you?
Went ahead and played.
I think Bedford did the same thing. Of course, I was at the funeral for my mother, so I didn't come home to do the game. But
I can remember that during that time period that, of course, we didn't have many stations to watch on television anyway, but everything was about John F. Kennedy during that time on television during that time period. That was a very sad time. And certainly April of 1968 was well. Al, when you think about 1968, what goes through your mind?
well, I don't think about it a lot. Like I said, the assassination of the president came at the same time that I buried my mother, and she was a widow who raised me from the time I was 12 years old on. So I was an only child, so I was pretty close to my mother. So it was a very tough weekend.
We have been discussing a time in which it was, when we look back now at 40 years ago, how an unusual time it was to actually have had Robert Kennedy, Roger Brannigan, Eugene McCarthy all come through the small county and the small town of Bedford, where we had our very short but brief time in which we could have got to hear personally these men and their hopes and dreams for America during a very difficult time in 1968. I grew to admire Robert Kennedy. I've always enjoyed reading about him over these years, but especially when we made reference to the action of April the 4th, whenever Martin Luther King had been assassinated. Robert Kennedy was advised not to go into Indianapolis, into the primarily African-American area in which that he was going into, because they anticipated riots. They had already been starting to break out in places like Detroit, New York, L.A., and they anticipated the same. When he gathered before the crowd in Indianapolis in 1968, they hadn't at that time heard that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. So he dropped that bomb upon this crowd. Again, they advised him not to go, but he felt like he needed to go. I want to close today's program with some of the words that he said as he was attempting to calm the crowd that was growing ever more angry about King's killing. And he said these words: "What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or they be black." And he ended that with these words: "Let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and to make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people." The words of Robert Kennedy on April 4th, 1968. Let me conclude by saying, some of the crowd said we walked away from that speech in pain, but not with a sense of revenge. It's a lasting testimony to Robert Kennedy's visit on that day and to our land in 1968 that there were no riots in the Circle City at that time. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you soon.